Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to the Real Life Process Podcast. It is so great to be back with you. I am so enjoying the series that we're doing on the Enneagram. Now, here at the Real Life Process, we help clients discover their real self, live into their best real life, and then in turn do their real work. But we also help train coaches to use this work in the work that they are doing out in the world. And so those are the two places we hang out with our personal clients, the people that we work with here at the process, and those that come to us for those kind of help. Maybe they're living with their hair on fire. But we also love helping other coaches use this work in the work they're doing. And one of the tools that we use is the tool of the Enneagram. And, I have been using this tool for so long that I kind of begin to take it for granted. Just what I know about it, how it's been integrated into my everyday life, how I use it so many times to say, wait a second, let me take a pause here and see if this is really a behavior that I want to do. Is this a rhythm? Is this a habit from old behavior or new behavior? It gives me a lens. I often, point to my glasses if you're watching on YouTube on our channel and say, wow, this gives me a lens to look through that's a real lens. I don't want to look through the distorted lens that I've had. So this series that we've been in, we are on episode number 3 of this Enneagram series, really has taken me back to my roots, I have to say. I was also last week at a conference that Brian Dixon put on. And at that conference, Beth and Jeff McCord were speaking. And they have the amazing organization called Your Enneagram Coach. And it was the first time that Beth and I got to meet in person. We've been on this Enneagram teaching journey, started about the same time back in 2015, 2016. And her and Jeff were just amazing to hear from. They have blown up the Enneagram world, along with Ian Cron when he came out with the book, The Road Back to You. And I have just reconnected to my love for this tool through this series. If you go back to my beginning episodes, you will actually see that this is where I started in the podcast world. I started with the tool of the Enneagram. The podcast was originally called The Enneagram in Your Real Life. And I've even gone back and listened to some of those old episodes. So if you are new to the podcast, and you start at the very, very beginning, you're going to get back in 2019 when we started the podcast, you're going to get a lot of Enneagram content. And the beauty of the Enneagram is that it can take you so much deeper. It can take you into places that will help you in this real self peace, that many of this internal peace that I talk about, creating your rule of life, creating the way you want to say yes and say no, and really diving into creating new rhythms and patterns and behaviors and routines in your life. The Enneagram is really what transformed for me. So today on this episode, we are going to have lots of free resources and lots of places that we're going to give you. So if in no other episode, you may not check out all the show notes, but for this episode, you're going to want the show notes. So either if you're watching on our YouTube channel, you can click over to the link to the show notes. If you're listening on your favorite iPod, where did that come from? That's really old. iPad, or that dates me, doesn't it, when I say iPod? That's funny. If you're watching on your computer, your iPad, any of those things, you'll want to click on the show notes for these particular links. So I'm going to kind of tell you some of these links up front because all of these will tie into this episode. So we have a link for our free needs and values assessment, just an intro to that assessment. We're going to talk about needs today and how the topic of stances with the Enneagram plays into needs, you may want to download our free Enneagram typing guide. That's absolutely free. That's a great place to dive in and start to begin to look at the types on the Enneagram, the 9 types that we talked about last week, and just read through the types, the authentic and adaptive behaviors, and how those how those 3 fit together in a harmony triad. You're not just your type, you're more than that. But to move into authentic behavior and get out of being stuck in your type. So you might want the free typing guide. You may want the needs and values assessment. You also may want to go to the link. Today, I'm going to be talking about stances, how we move in the world, in this place, the energy that we have. And we have some free resources on that actually come through our free book resource page. So in the new book that I wrote that came out last fall in November of 2022, Do What Matters, Live from Rest, Not Rush, was released out into the world. And in there, I talk about the Enneagram. And so I have some free resources that are on my book page. And so we have that link for you. Last not least, we have a link to a really great podcast that happened to just come out at the same time I was thinking about doing this episode on stances. 2 people that I have high respect for in the Enneagram world got together and did a podcast. One is Ian Cron, and Ian wrote the book, The Road Back to You. And that book kind of opened up the Enneagram to the modern world and brought it to another place. I shouldn't say he opened it up, but he brought it to another level to the masses. But then one of my friends and mentors, Dr. Jerome Wagner, Dr. Jerry Wagner, was on Ian's podcast, Typology, just a few weeks ago. And they were actually talking about the stances. Now, Dr. Jerry Wagner is a friend of mine. I have known him for several years now. I met him through one of my mentors, Claire Lowridge, who wrote Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram. And Dr. Wagner actually is the assessment, the online assessment that we use here at the Real Life Process, called the Wagner Enneagram Personality Profile Styles or something. We call it the WEPS for short. And that is actually the basis of our results. Dr. Wagner was kind enough years ago to say, yes, you can use my assessment and you can use it to put together the results packets that you have. So we are always grateful to Jerry for letting us do that. And I love this podcast episode that he and Ian Cron did together. So we have that link in the show notes as well. If you haven't listened to the Typology podcast, it's a great podcast. Ian does a wonderful job of having amazing guests on there that really talk about their types and how they live through them, or experts like Dr. Wagner from Loyola University that has really been someone who did bring the Enneagram to the modern day world through the work that he has done. One of the early Enneagram teachers. Highest respect for both of these men and just the work that they've done in the Enneagram. So that's enough about all the free resources, but you can tell that there is lots of great content in this particular episode around stances. So let's dive in. Let's get to the content. If you fast forwarded through all of that, let's now get to where we're going. And if you're watching on YouTube, you're actually going to see me bring up a resource onto the screen. But this resource is in those free downloads that I just talked about. So this is called Enneagram Stances. Well, let's define what we mean by stances. So as I talked about on the episode last week, once you kind of discover, hey, this is my home type, this is who, when I look at the Enneagram circle and I look at these 9 different styles or types, this is the one that I think I resonate with the most. Now, whether you take an assessment, we have those. I'll give you a link to that at the bottom of the episode. Whether you take an assessment, whether you do that through narrative tradition, through talking through it, walk around with it for a while and say, I think I am a 4. Or, yes, I really resonate with the 8 or the 1 or the 9. Once you've discovered that home type, then I think there is a great connection in these 3 centers of intelligence. So in my own story, for example, I am a type or style 3 on the Enneagram. So I know that I connect to the 6 and the 9. If I'm a 6, I know I connect to the 3 and the 9. If you're an 8, that 8-5-2 harmony. If you're a 1, that 7-4-1 harmony. So once you find your home base, as I call it, then there's a connection to the other 2 centers of intelligence. But there is also a connection to how you move in the world. So there's an internal way that you just want to move. I often refer to internal and external. So there's an internal way that we want to move in our, kind of inside of us, and that comes out externally. And that's kind of this energy. It's the way we carry ourselves. It's much as the same, it's like a posture or an attitude. It's a habit, it's a pattern, it's a way of responding. What I love how this ties into the work, these stances that we do here at the Real Life Process. So much of the real self internal work that we do is about saying, maybe this isn't working for me exactly the way I want. So as I create my rule of life, as I discover my needs and my values, and I write out a real life statement and I say, these are the big rocks, these are the areas of focus that matter in my life, I may choose to move a little bit more holy, a little bit, not holy as in spiritual, but whole self. I want to move a little bit more in my whole self. I want to tap into all 3 centers. I don't want to get stuck in one stance, one way of being, one pattern of behavior. So stances in the history of the Enneagram come from a few different places. If you are a research person, if you're kind of love the head types, you might want to listen into this background of this. So stances come from Karen Horney did some work with stances, and it's often called the Hornevian stances. And you can Google that and look it up and see kind of her work. And then the Enneagram Institute also has done some work with this. And if you listen to the podcast from Dr. Wagner and Ian Cron, you'll get some history and some places like, how did this develop out? And personally, as an Enneagram person who works with this tool, I have combined a little bit of all of that together to fit into the way that I see the Enneagram through the harmony triad model. And so there's all different ways, but the main idea that you want to take from this idea of stances is you have a way of moving in the world, of showing up that is kind of a groove and a pattern and a behavior that you have. And you've often, as we talk about in the Enneagram and the layers that this tool has of discovery, you have often come to that pattern through kind of 3 different ways: through the gene pool you were given, through the just genetics that you have within you, through the nurture that you've been given. So nature, nurture, and then through your own free will choices, you have developed these patterns and behaviors. So nature, nurture, and free will have formed this in you in your early life. And you have this way of being, this stance that you have that coordinates with your Enneagram type. So let's unpack this a little bit. I call these stances forward, toward, and away. You have a forward energy, you have a toward being with others energy, or you have an away energy. Now, I give a really simple definition of this in the free resources that I have. But remember that you can do all of that forward energy either in an authentic or an adaptive way. You can do it healthy, your best day, or you can do it bad, your worst day. You can do a toward energy in a healthy way. I'm moving toward others. I have great boundaries. I'm showing up well. Or you can do it in an adaptive way. I'm doing the overgo. I am fearful. I'm afraid I'm going to lose a relationship. I'm afraid I'm going to lose this. So I'm smothering sometimes. You can also do the away energy, both healthy, authentic, or adaptive. I am moving away and I'm withdrawing in a healthy way, or I'm withdrawing to avoid conflict, or I'm withdrawing to avoid and I'm numbing out. So many of you, if you've done any counseling work or read any books or done any inner work on yourself, you've heard the word fight, flight, and freeze. And in many ways, not always 100%, but these match up with these stances. Some of the language that other Enneagram teachers use around the forward stance is aggressive. That's that fight. I'm going to fight, and I'm going to be aggressive in my forward energy. That would be, kind of an adaptive behavior. In the toward energy, it is that in the toward energy, it is that freeze place. I'm going to freeze up. And in the away energy, it is the flight. I'm going to get away from this. So those three words, fight, flight, freeze, can overlap in these stances as well. But let me walk you through these three stances now that you have a little bit of background. They give us a way of, checking in with our behaviors is what they do. Let's talk about the forward one too. Now, in the adaptive side, it might be called the aggressive stance. But many times, if you're a forward energy, now in my definition, this would be our Enneagram types 3s and 7s and 8s. They have a forward motion about them, a forward energy. Some other types, people that talk might put the 1 here instead of the 7, but I really think it's that 7. These people are happy to be in charge. They're also many times can put their agenda first. The 3s of like, here's how we'll get it done. Here's the effective and efficiency. The 8s through, I know how to lead us. And the 7s through, I know how we can have fun. Let's go. So they seem that they are standing kind of independently of everybody else. And at times they can feel like they are moving, if they're in their adaptive behavior, moving against you. It can feel a little forceful, a little bit aggressive, hence the name aggressive. Healthy, they're forward. Aggressive, they're really in their adaptive behavior. Authentic, forward, aggressive, adaptive. Their orientation with time is many times very future looking. They look to the future. Now, I kind of align here with another Enneagram teacher, Susan Stabile, in The Path Between Us. So this is some of the language that she uses as well, and then I've added in some of my own. So that is the aggressive or forward stance, the 3s, the 7s, and the 8s. Now, you may hear yourself in there if you kind of identify with a 3, 7, or 8. The 3s can want to really move to get it done. As I said, the 8s want to lead it out, and the 7s want to lead it to fun and joy. They're looking to the future. How can we have more fun? How can we get more done? How can we lead this well? Now, the next stance, the toward stance, is the often called to the dependent stance. So listen to that word. The toward stance is the healthy side. I'm moving towards you, but I have good boundaries, and I'm not depending on you, which is the unhealthy side. These Enneagram types, the ones, the twos, and the sixes, kind of lean towards being in this toward stance. And most of the time, these people are concerned with others' expectations. So they're loyal, they're dependable, they're loving. Even the one, which I put the one in the toward stance, not the forward stance, as some do, the one is really wanting to get it right or make it good for the sake of others. It's not about them, it's for the sake of others. So that's the lens through which I see the type 1 in the toward stance. And so they're concerned about others' expectations, that loyalty, dependable. They're seen as moving towards, and their orientation to time is in the presence or in the present. We need to fix it now. That's the one. And that's why they still can be in that body gut type of like, we got to fix it now, or it's going to upset me. I'm going to be resentful that we didn't fix it before we moved on, or we didn't get it right first. The 2 is I'm going to stay here and I'm going to love on you and love on you and love on you in their adaptive behavior, in that dependent stance. I won't leave your side. I'm loyal till the end because it makes me feel good, is what's really coming there. And the 6 is loyal. They're loyal, and they're present to that loyalty. They love to work in that team expectation. They love to work in that environment. They get sometimes their identity, if they're not careful, from someone else or what they've read or what they've studied. And it's that search for their own self that can become dependent. The fear that, I don't know who I am. So the toward types, the dependent stances, are the 1s, the 2s, and the 6s. Now, when they're healthy, which is, again, going to this rule of life that we want to help people create, then their behaviors shift and change. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But in their healthiness, they're moving toward others, but they have good boundaries. They know who they are. They're loving well. The last stance is the away stance. And the away is the healthy side. I'm moving away because it's what's best right now. But if they move too far away, they've actually gone into withdrawing. And that's the 4s, the 5s, and the 9s. So their naturalness is to the 4, 5, and 9 types on the Enneagram styles or types naturally want to be away. These people are slow to act. Many times they can be shyer, more introverted. Their personality's a little more withdrawn, but they are seen as moving away from others. And their orientation to time sometimes can be in the past. If they're in unhealthy behaviors, they can stay stuck in the past. Their reference to everything is in the past, the way we've always done it. It feels... for a 4, it feels like we're leaving behind those deep feelings if we move in a new way. For the 5 this is the research that I trust and know. So I trust this. And so that fear piece of the head types, I trust this. And the 9s stay in the past because there's less conflict. Growth comes from conflict many times. And so if we just stay the way we are, we don't have that conflict. So as we've walked through all of these, the forward, the toward, and the away being the healthy, authentic side, the aggressive, dependent, and withdrawing being the more moving towards more of the adaptive behaviors, and even the relationship to time, you can see that, these stances can have a way that we move to get our needs met. So there's a tool that we use here at the Real Life Process called the Needs and Values Assessment. And you remember at the beginning of the podcast, I referenced a lot of free resources. Well, that's one of them. Because, and this was kind of been an aha that I'm sitting in right now too, as I work through stances again, if you have a certain need, you are going to use, God has put in us a need for certain things in our life. And again, many of those needs came from childhood experiences, but they are in us. They're a part of our DNA. They're a part of our personality. They're a part of how we process the world, the lens through which we look. So, for example, I'm just going to share with you some of my needs. We really get down in a needs and values assessment. We have an intro one that we'll give you, but we get down in the depth of this tool to the top 5 needs, the top 5 values, and your exact need and value from those categories in our full assessment. You can actually get that full assessment with any of our Enneagram coaches, or any of our real life process coaches. I called them Enneagram coaches, but they use the tool of the Enneagram, and they have that full needs and values assessment available, as do we. But the intro one will give you enough to go on. For example, in mine, I have a need for accomplishment. I have a need for power, for work, for order. And so I have to be very careful how those needs are met, or I can shift to aggressive and get out of being a healthy forward type, and I'm in my aggressive behavior because my needs aren't being met. It is not up to someone else to meet those needs. It is mine to meet those needs, and to do it with healthy rhythms, behaviors, and routines, which is part of creating my rule of life. But when I come up against those needs not being met for a period of time, I can go into that aggressive. In knowing what I know about the Enneagram, it helps me to reframe it into, how would I want to check in with the 2 other centers of intelligence that I have? How would I want to move around the circle to my 6 and think about others and be more toward? How would I want to move all the way around in my harmony to my 9, which is part of my away type, and just take a step back, move out of being so forward? For me, it's an invitation to come away that God invites me to as a believer. And how can I be more loyal, which is my toward, more in a prayerful spiritual rhythm stance, which is my 9. And that will move me then back up to being forward, but in a healthy way, not aggressive. So knowing my needs for certain things and my values of being, I'm a catalyst. I have a value for mastery, for doing my best. I have some very forward needs and values. So I need to make sure that I don't stay in that adaptive, aggressive side of self. So knowing my stance energy, then knowing that I have options of other things. One of the things that I love that Jerry Wagner talks about, and he references it even in the podcast he did with Ian, that if you stay stuck in your type, then, when you stay stuck, you are really in a place of being stuck. You only have that option. That's all that you are. But when you open yourself up to these other 2 stances, to these other 2 ways of being, to the energies of other things, the toward, the away, the forward, then now if you open yourself up to one more, you still kind of have a dilemma. Which way do I go? But when you open yourself up to full center, all 3 centers of yourself, and you check in with all 3 centers, now you have a choice. And I love that. So if I am knowing my needs are pretty high level energy needs, knowing that I have the option to move toward and to move away, to take a breath. You often hear me talk about slowing down for me, living from rest, not rush. But let's give a different example. Say you are in a harmony triad and your type is actually an away type. You are a type 4, for example. How would then, as a 4, you naturally want to go away? You naturally can withdraw deep down inside of you. But what would it be like when you're in that withdrawing and you look at some of your needs and their needs for comfort, their need for harmony, for order, um, and what if you could move in a toward way and say, but how about if I show up here? What would that do if I move from the past into the present? Now I have a choice, but what if I added in then just a quick thought about how I could think future and think forward? What does that now open up to? That opens up a choice to stay stuck in a way or to move toward and then forward. Now I'm living full circle. So I know that's throwing a lot at you, but I hope you can see the movement of these stances, that you have access through the harmony triad to all 3. The 3 is the forward, the 6 is the toward, and the 9 is the away. God designed you in all 3. In the 741, the 7 is the forward energy. Let's go, joy, fun. The 2 or the 1 is the toward. But what about others? Can we get it good for them? And the 4 brings you away into deep self. 741, harmony, stances. And then we have the 8, which shows up and says, I can lead in this situation. And we have the 2, which says, I can be present and love in this situation. And we have the 5 that says, and I can tie in the past, tie in what we know, tie in what you've learned to that powerful 8 and that loving 2. I love the idea of the energy and the stances. It has been something transformational for me because I do have that forward type, but I think it can be just as transformational for you as a toward type or an away type, living into our authentic self, knowing that we can go to the side of the adaptive, aggressive, dependent withdrawing. That's not where we want to live. That's not the rule of life, the modern day rule of life that I want to create. So in this real self piece of the work we do here at the Real Life Process, the Enneagram, these stances are just another layer of this beautiful, beautiful tool that can get balance and integration from how I live internally, how I am internally, and then how I want to live and bring my best self out into the world, the self that God uniquely designed and created me to be. So as I said, we're doing about 4 or 5 episodes here on the Enneagram, and this is just one of them. But this one has so many free resources, so many things that you can check out to do the deeper work. From the free Enneagram typing guide to the needs and values assessment to the podcast episode we referenced with Ian and Dr. Wagner to the free tools that we have for you around the Enneagram, stances, all of those things you can check out. But the one that you might want to check out is if you really would like to know your Enneagram type, we have a assessment that we do, and we'll put a link to that in the show note. It is a paid assessment. It's called the Real Life Process Enneagram Personality Profile, and you can go check that out as well. It's pretty reasonable. It's $79 to take that assessment, and you will go through Dr. Wagner's profile, and then we will send you back your results. You're welcome to talk with one of our coaches to walk you through those results as well if you would like to. But we just want to make sure that you have every opportunity to dive into the wonderful and beautiful tool of the Enneagram. of the Enneagram. I can't wait to come back next week. We're going to be talking more about it. The Enneagram has been a key tool for me to really be able to move into that away space and say, let me take a pause, let me take a breath, let me practice spiritually this idea that I close every podcast with, that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. And in my forward type, I always miss them. But as I've learned the tool of the Enneagram, it's helped me to slow down in ways to make sure that I see all of those extraordinary moments in my everyday life. So we'll be back next week with more from the Real Life Process podcast. We can't wait to be with you. Connect with us in all the places socially, and we will see you next week on the Real Life Process podcast.